Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Just Another Autism Podcast. I'm Eileen Lamb, and today I am joined by Dr. Morris. Dr. Morris is the director of metaverse programs and a professor at Morehouse College, where she's doing some really incredible work using AI and immersive technology to make education more inclusive and accessible. She's also a mom of five boys, including her son Seth, who has level 3 autism, and advocacy is a huge part of her life. She and Seth even co-authored a children's book together and do a lot of work supporting and uplifting neurodiverse families, especially within Black communities. So I'm really excited to have her on the podcast today, and please give her a warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So why don't you start by introducing yourself and sharing how autism intersects with your life, both as a mom but also as an educator.
Absolutely. So I am Dr. Muhsinah Morris, and many people call me Dr. Mom or MOM, Molder of Minds. I'm a biomolecular chemist by training, an educator by calling, and a futurist by assignment. At my core, though, I'm a mother of five sons, two who have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and they have very different profiles and support needs. So one is 8 years old and highly functioning, and the other is my 18-year-old son, Seth, who started me on this journey of autism advocacy, and he is level 3. And so he needs more support than others, and I am a proud caregiving mom.
How does
And
the
so it's not something that I really study from a distance. It's something that I live through. And I'm also a special needs sibling. So I had a brother who had meningitis at the age of 4 and it left him brain damage. So advocacy is something that I take very seriously. Working with people with special needs is something in my educational work that I lean into. And so right now I'm the director of metaverse programs at Morehouse College, and autism shapes how I design my learning environment. And my work sits at the intersection of care, cognition, and technology because my sons and my students, as well as myself, have taught me that brilliance often shows up wrapped in different.
and as you know, February is Black History Month. How what does it mean to you, especially when it comes to autism and neurodivergent people? What does it mean to you personally?
For me, Black is excellent. And it always has been. The expectation of me as a young Black girl growing up in Decatur, Georgia, was that I would be excellent in spite of all of my own neurodivergence. And so I also sit very high on the spectrum and was a gifted child. So I call myself the twice exceptional child, similar to my 8 year old, where I had a lot of genius, but I had a lot of asynchronous development um, and didn't talk for a while. So Black History Month, though, for me, means that we get to celebrate the unrecognized genius of Black people. A lot of people who are innovators and creatives were not given the label. They were just said that they were different or difficult, and or they didn't conform to the standards um, of the day. And so the neurodivergence that is deeply threaded amongst the heroes that we have in our in our black history, our ancestors, and even our future um, leaders. Um, it's not just resilience, but it's innovation. And then it makes me think like whose stories are still missing, like who did we not name? And so we're finally, as a community, naming autism as something that we accept. And the people who are or have lived with autism being a part of their everyday understanding are starting to unmask and step up and say, uh, all along I have been brilliant, but I've also been different. And that difference I now know to be autism, or that difference I know to be ADHD for a lot of middle-aged women, or another type of neurodivergence. I was dyslexic or whatever the case may be, but people are starting to speak up. And for me, I remember not understanding that you had to talk to communicate. So people would say that I didn't talk, and I like I talk all the time, but I didn't know that the voice in my head was uh, was not heard by everyone. And I distinctly remember the moment when I realized that the voice inside of me was like a whispering, and that you needed the sound to come up and out of your mouth for other people to hear. And I was about 4. And I was sitting in a salon chair getting my hair done, and I had to go to the bathroom. And I asked my auntie, who was doing my hair at the time, um, in my head within myself, could I use the bathroom? She didn't move. She just kept talking and doing my hair, and finally I blurted it out so loud because I like built up the voice inside of me. Was kind of like how I can describe it, and I realized then that wow, there's a voice inside of me. But what's so interesting about this same voice is, even as an adult, even as someone who is like on this podcast, talking takes a whole lot of energy from me. Like it takes a lot to be present and speak out my ideas. It's much easier for me to write them down or to communicate in that way. It's funny because me and my son say and do a lot of things, but probably not even utter a word to each other. And he's limited verbal, which is quite interesting. And so I told him, you can talk, but I think a lot of Black people throughout history have had gifts and talents that have been hidden behind these differences, and now they're getting a chance to express it. And so it's very wonderful to be able to celebrate neurodivergence during this month.
Do you think Black families still face more struggles getting a diagnosis now in 2026?
Absolutely, for various reasons. Um, a lot of time the diagnosis is delayed, like Seth was. A lot of time kids are misdiagnosed, so you see other behaviors and it's labeled as autism, or even some kind of emotional behavior disorder before autism is named, like oppositional defiance disorder or something like that. And then a lot of young children, like I have several relatives who didn't get diagnoses for their children until they were 9 or 10. A lot of that has to do with general mistrust of medical systems. Don't want your child to be labeled and put in a classroom where they will be ridiculed, or there's a lot of stigma. And so a lot of Black families miss early intervention windows. I know I did. And it's not that the parents don't care, it's just that a lot of times systems don't necessarily listen um, to what parents are saying, as if they are not the expert of their own children. And I'll give myself as an example. I had concerns about Seth early on, from the time that he was 24 months, and he had really great pediatrician, a wonderful group of Black professional women that I admired and respected. And they thought because he never missed his milestones that maybe he was just um, expressed himself by talking with his hands. So, and I talk with my hands, and my husband talks with his hands. So he thought that this, him stimming in this way was him expressing himself just like what he saw. So, and because he could read, and because he was affectionate, and because he did make eye contact at certain ages, they did not see it autism. And so by the time he was diagnosed, he had missed programs like Babies Can't Wait or any other program that could have possibly helped him early on or helped us develop routines for him to be able to then manage um, before it became overwhelming. And so um, I think it was a protection from my physician for me not to be so worried. And then at the time, I had 4 children and I was not yet 30. So, like, it was a lot going on in my own life. And um, I didn't want to be overly, because I was a special needs sibling, so I didn't want to be overly cautious about it because what my brother experienced having a traumatic brain injury was a lot different from what I was seeing from my son. And so I didn't want to also put my fears that maybe something was happening to my child on my child. And so it's a lot of that happened within family structures where you end up missing um, the needs of the child. And for me, it seems like Seth just always missed the window. Legislation passed, and it was for kids 8 and under. He just turned 9. You know what I mean? Like, or um, whatever the case may be. And so I think we still have a long, long way to go as Black families to be able to accept, to be able to define and understand what our children need. But I also think that the system in itself and some of the questions and some of our cultural norms are not also baked into some of the ways in which autism is diagnosed. Um, so a lot of cultures, and I can speak because I had an advocacy, a friend that we did advocacy work together for Autism Speaks, and she was Chinese. And she would say, we don't allow our children to bathe themselves at 2. And so when my daughter went in and they asked her to bathe a doll, she was completely clueless, but we don't, we bathe our children until they're about 4 or 5 years old. So she wouldn't know to bathe or soap down a doll. Like that would not be the way that she interacted. And I could understand how she felt because I remember them asking my son Cameron, my 8 year old, uh, how would he wash his hair? And so like some of the questions just are not ways in which we interact with our children until a certain age. And so I think that a lot of the testing mechanisms need to be changed because then you end up feeling as if, well, did I fail as a parent because I we don't do these things, but it is culturally something that we just don't do, right?
Right. So, what would you say to Black parents who are worried something is going on with their child, but they're like scared of the word autism? Because I know some families are afraid of the diagnosis and what it might mean and what happens afterwards. Would you have any words for them?
It's a label, not a limitation. It will help you find the resources that you may need and the information that you may need. Whether you decide to use that to describe your child or not, it is still informative to know. I've never had a conversation where I sat down and said, Seth, you have autism, and this is what it means. I haven't had that conversation. I have never sat down with Cameron and talked about his differences. As a matter of fact, I don't see where that is useful or as helpful in helping them navigate for themselves unless you need them to advocate for themselves at a particular time. Um, but just for the sake of, I feel like too, sometimes we rush to label um, instead of watching our children develop in their own time, and we rush to compare. And autism can also be a delay and not necessarily that they will never reach a particular milestone. And so you see nonverbal children who end up speaking and being completely communicative, and you see uh, children use alternative ways to communicate. You see kids that have other gifts and talents once you allow them to kind of just be more self aware and explore on their own without the bounds and the constraints of socializing them beyond their will. Um, so for families, I would say know what your child can do and lean into those strengths and the things that they can't do. Do your best to accommodate them in a way that makes them feel human and comfortable because they are still human beings and they deserve to feel good about who they are. They were made for you in a time like this. So um, I'd say lean into their strength and build them up as human beings, like build up their confidence and their ability and work on the weaknesses that they may have or those kind of things the best way that you know how, and don't be afraid to get help
Love
when it's
it.
beyond
Yeah, that's a very good answer. I think that's going to be useful to many families. Thank you for sharing. I wanted to ask you about your work at Morehouse. How do you see HBCUs playing a unique role in supporting Black neurodivergent students who might not feel seen in like a traditional college spaces? And can you tell our listeners who are not familiar about your work at Morehouse, like what you're doing? Give us a little more details.
Absolutely. So I was trained as a biomolecular chemist, and all my life I went to Black schools, including Clark Atlanta University, which is a historically Black college and university. So HBCU stands for Historically Black Colleges and Universities. And they are uh, small. A lot of them are small schools. Some are public, some are private. But they are places where the majority of the population are historically from the African diaspora. What's interesting is that there is one HBCU that is predominantly white, and it is because it's a state school, and I think it's in Kentucky. Um, don't get me to remembering with my brain, but um, it is, I think, about 60% white now.
Interesting.
But it's still an HBCU because it was historically
Historically.
created for Black students in America, and so um, I believe that. So I do a lot of the interesting part about early intervention is that it worked well. Early intervention worked well even amongst Black families that may not have understood that their child needed particular things, but they built a village around them in a certain kind of way, just as a protective village. And HBCUs are uniquely positioned to nurture that type of difference, primarily because they already know what it's like to be under resourced, to be overlooked, to historically have to fight or uh, to be seen, to be heard, to be leaders. And so at Morehouse, I see it as an opportunity to actually design culturally affirming, identity safe, and technologically adaptive learning environments for students. And that HBCUs can actually lead by modeling what it looks like to center belonging and mentorship and whole person education, especially for Black neurodivergent students who are navigating college sometimes without a diagnosis or even language for their experience. And for me, I'm grateful to have attended an HBCU because it was such a nurturing place. And it was as if, like, the elders were wise beyond their years and knew that I needed more. right? They knew that I needed allowances for not being able to make my 8 a.m. honors chemistry course because I stayed up all night studying for an exam and ruminating over it, or that I needed more assistance to complete graduate school applications. So they put me in a room and said, "You're going to do this and not leave this space until it's finished, and I'm gonna bring you lunch," you know. Um, and they kept me under their thumb and they managed me. I was in a scholarship program as well. So, like, that genius that always just followed me throughout my academic life was there, but the social and emotional abilities weren't always there. The time management wasn't always there. Understanding what to wear in appropriate situations, like interviews or rushes or whatever the case may be, was not always there. And that community of support made transitioning from a large family where I had siblings at the time to keep me in check to a large Black community that was like family very helpful in continuing to grow. And so I think HBCUs should take a larger role and a bigger step in making um, programs that support Black neurodivergent and autistic people, because I think that they already have the tools and the capacity and the faculty and the love there.
It's wonderful. Great mission. And finally, I have one more question for you. You're an Autism Speaks Advocacy ambassador. I love that you're doing work with us. But what gaps are you most focused on closing for Black autistic people right now?
There is a huge gap between awareness and access.
Very true.
So when you have awareness that autism exists and you don't have the resources to do anything about it, it's really, really a hard situation to navigate. And so we actually need equitable access to diagnoses and culturally competent type of care, transition support into adulthood, but also economic pathways for autistic children and that become adults that actually honor their strengths. And so I'm deeply, deeply invested in changing the narrative of what it looks like to be in quality jobs as a person who has autism and other neurodivergences, deeply vested in what it looks like to have access to economic opportunities that actually build you up, entrepreneurship, um, because sometimes it's better to help build legacy for our young people within their own talents and gifts versus trying to fit them into a corporate box where they may or may not be able to navigate the politics of the landscape. And so I'm really trying to move us away from using deficit based language and more language that highlights who we are as neurodivergent people, that gives dignity and agency and talks more about possibilities. And so me and my son actually wrote a book called Seth Can Do All Things. And it's on Amazon right now because I wanted people to look at what what can be done versus what can't occur and the things that you have lost. I think that there are so many people that grieve the diagnosis of autism that they miss the blessing of the gift. And so, if you can look at those things that can be done and make sure that as a system, as a group, we are advocating for access just as much as awareness, because awareness without access is performative. It's not accomplishing anything for anyone. And so humanity can't wait for us to pay attention. 1 in 45 adults live on the spectrum. And we want, once their caregivers are no longer with them, and
Oh, yeah.
most autistic people will outlive their caregivers, that they also have quality lives and economic means to grow. So making sure that they have access to systems that work for them is very, very
It's beautiful. I love your quote. It's gonna be your quote now, but awareness without access is just performative. That's it. I mean, that's such a beautiful way to end this. I hope people really think on that because yeah, awareness is great, and we need awareness to get that access. But now let's work on getting access, right? So
absolutely
thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I have two sons on the spectrum, same as you, one level 1, one level 3, who will require support for the rest of his life.
right.
24/7 care, you know,
Yep.
completely nonverbal, need help with everything. So, totally with you on that. But thank you so much for joining us today, joining me on the podcast. And I think you're going to help a lot of people. Thank you for your great work, what you're doing for Black families and the autism world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you can find me at unitethemetaverse.com. That's where I do all of my good work and trying to make sure that it's all inclusive and that all tech is accessible to all. So thank you so much.